working with doctoral students, what's the most important piece of advice that you give them?
Do I have to be restricted to just one?
No, please go
Okay.
on. We've got at least 10 minutes here. Go
Great.
for it.
Well, I'll probably have 8 minutes worth of stuff.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm talking to all you PhD students out there. I see your faces. If there's one most important thing, it's to recognize that research is a social enterprise, whether it's a social revolution or how you develop data. There's a theme across every presenter so far in this series of shows that Rich is providing. And the theme is you got to talk to people. The tendency is to withdraw. We had people in my program who disappeared for a year because they hadn't figured out what they wanted to do. And that's the exact wrong thing to do. You should do the exact opposite. Bring ideas to your faculty, bring ideas to your peers, engage in conversations. And if you reflect on all the discussants you've had so far, all the interviewees, they've all said the same thing. You got to be talking to people more and more. And ultimately, it is a social enterprise. And if you don't develop relationships, if you aren't outgoing, then you put yourself at a disadvantage in terms of coming up with good ideas. So it's about this network, this social fabric. And to create the social fabric, you may need to do certain things. So
and by the way, I'll agree with that. I'll say for myself that isolation was one of the things that definitely held me back very much in my early career, definitely.
So at Berkeley, we decided to celebrate people when they passed their written exams or passed their orals. And we came up with this little gift. It's Oliver Williamson's schema done artistically. I'm a woodworker, so I made these. And we had parties for everybody when they passed either their orals or their written exams. And we had a kind of a ceremony where we'd say funny things about everybody and give them gifts. It was called the Williamson Society. And we did those things to build relationships, to build trust, to build the warp and the weave of the social fabric so that people would collaborate more. And if you collaborate more, you develop your ideas that much faster. So finding ways to engage, maybe not just individually, but to build a social community that's involved in learning is a pretty big deal. So that's the biggest thing. But I'd like to share with you some tips and tricks that I share with a lot of young faculty and PhD students. And you might want to get a notepad out for this one. Okay, I'm going to give you.
We are recording this, so you know.
Okay, I got 7 tips. 7 tips for you. Tip number 1. When you're thinking of an idea, write the introduction. And the introduction says, here's the phenomenon, here's the issue, here's why the current literature doesn't really explain it. Here's the value I'm going to create, here's what's going to happen, and here's how much value it's going to create. Write that up in 3 to 5 pages, no more than 5. Then go to your colleagues, two colleagues, and say, hey, will you read this and give me feedback in 24 hours? If it's 4 or 5 pages, they'll do it. When you get that feedback, look at it, assume they're right, and rewrite your introduction, make it better. Then go to 2 faculty members, do the same thing. Ask for feedback in 24 hours. If you give them a paper, which takes you a year to write, it goes on a stack of paper, and it may get lost in that stack of paper. But 4 pages, 5 pages, they'll give back to you immediately. Do that 3, 4, 5 times until you have feedback that says, huh, this is interesting. This hasn't been done before. What you've done then is, number 1, market research. You know that you have a good idea. Number 2, you've laid out a game plan, a contract, in terms of what you have to do to execute. Now, maybe it changes along the way if you get involved in data, but at least you have a very strong vector in which to proceed. So this this rapid feedback is about failing quickly, failing inexpensively, and getting market research and going down the learning curve quickly. I try to do that with every paper I write. I probably do it a little less so now, but in my early career, I did it with every paper I wrote, and it kept me from going down the wrong path many, many times. Point 2, do the same thing with your methods section. Write up your methods section, find your favorite econometrician, hopefully 2 or 3, the toughest people you know, and ask them to give you their feedback on whether or not you're doing the right thing. They'll tell you right away. And if you have a good econometrician, it takes them 5 minutes to see what you're doing, and they're going to ask you a few questions, and they'll say, well, you know what? You're not thinking about the error structure correctly, and therefore you need to do something differently. Yes, you need a panel estimator, but really you need an Ariano bond estimator, for example. So the second tip is do the same sort of market research on your methods section. Third, I think you should manage the paper process as a project. We don't learn project management skills as academics, but project management skills are what you need if you're going to get things spit out, if you're going to get things published, if you're going to get things accepted. So this is particularly true if you have co-authors, and many of you will co-author. So one thing about a project approach in co-authoring is you actually want to have a contract up front. Now, by contract, I don't mean a formal document that's signed, but certainly an email exchange where you both agreed to what you're doing, what you're both going to contribute, and what happens if there's some conflict. What happens if someone doesn't follow through? Are you going to change the ordering on the names when you title the paper? How are you going to remediate and resolve disputes? Now, you can't go to a third party, obviously, but you do want to set convergent expectations. Do you like how I slipped in all that transaction cost stuff right there? I just slipped it in. So you want to manage it as a project, at least in terms of the contract. But you also want to think about how you're going to manage the portfolio of projects, which I'm going to come back to in a few minutes. Tip number 4, if you get an R&R, drop everything and work on it. Get it done. In other words, focus on the bottleneck activity. Eliminate the bottleneck. And often it happens around R&R. I've seen people who have 2 R&Rs, but they're focused on writing a new paper. I'm like, well, what are you doing? You only have so much time for tenure. So focus on the bottleneck activity, the critical activity, and R&Rs typically are those activities. Okay, switching gears. Number 5. This is the biggest mistake I made as a junior faculty member. When I graduated with my PhD, I had 10 different projects, 10 different papers. And what I would do is work on one, get to a sticking point, set it aside, go work on another. Get to a sticking point, set it aside, go work to another. And unfortunately, every time I switched from one paper to another, I had to reload into my head the research, the relevant research, all the issues. So every time I switched, there was a loss. And because I didn't bust through the barrier, I came back next time, the barrier was still there. If I kicked it over to my co-author, the co-author didn't get through the barrier. And so there is this power of focus. It took me until my 3rd year as an assistant professor to recognize I should focus. And so 10 months of the year, I focus sequentially. That is, I work on a paper until it's done, unless an R&R comes in. And by focusing, the creative juices eventually kick in and you bust through that barrier. Or because of the social fabric, you've talked to all these other faculty members and you've got new ideas and you bust through. You have to focus until you bust through the wall. Now, I said do that 9 or 10 months a year. The other months, I'm often juggling, getting data sets, getting people to work on them, to clean them up, to do these sort of things to prepare for the time when I need to focus. The power of focus was never explained to me. And it turns out to be fundamental for busting through these barriers, these walls. The sixth topic we've already discussed, which is you want to figure out who you are, have clarity, which means come up with your 30-second elevator pitch about who you are in the marketplace. I gave you mine. What's mine, Rich?
Jackson Nickerson studies the antecedents and performance consequences of organizational choices.
A+. Man, you're awesome. You're awesome. That's right. So whatever yours is, come up with it. Because not only does it help you market yourself, it allows you to filter which project you should work on and which ones you shouldn't. Because you want to develop your reputation of who you are, you want to have some coherency in your research, and you need this filter to say, you know, that's an interesting project, but it's really not going to add to who I am, my reputation, and how I am going to dent the universe. Okay, maybe scratch the universe. But you want to come up with that. The last one, you don't need to know now, but I'm going to share it with you anyway. My belief is every 3, 4, 5 years, you should basically reinvest in learning a new area of the literature. You should reinvest and reinvent yourself. Now, in my worldview, I've done that outside of strategy and brought it into strategy. So I've read a lot in terms of the learning and education literature. I've read a lot in terms of the psychology literature. Frankly, I've gone deep into certain areas of economics. But every 3 to 5 years, I reinvest because new ideas come from smashing together old ideas. And if you bring ideas that are more diverse than other people, you increase the likelihood that you're going to come up with some new and potentially big idea. You know, don't do that every year. You might not do it for the first 5 years as you're commercializing the dissertation and extending those things, but certainly after 5 years, just as you start to get to tenure, you want to start doing it after that and on a regular cadence. That allows you, I hope, to grow intellectually, professionally, and who knows, maybe personally. Those are my ideas, and I consumed my 8 or 10 minutes.
Great stuff, man.